Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're really going to dig into Deep Work by Cal Newport. It's practically a must-read now for anyone trying to actually focus and get things done with all the digital distractions around us.
Yeah, it's not just another one of those put your phone away kind of books, is it? What I find fascinating is how Newport ties the whole deep work thing, really focusing on those meaty tasks to these big economic shifts that are happening right now.
So it's not just about being more productive, it's almost like a survival skill for this new world of work.
It's almost like he's saying that, yeah, like the ability to really get deep into something complex without getting derailed is becoming, well, almost essential to stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, so walk us through that a bit. What's going on in the world that makes focusing like this so crucial? It's not like we're all trying to predict elections like Nate Silver, the guy Newport talks about.
Right, right. But Silver's story, it's like this perfect example of a bigger trend. Think about it. We've got intelligent machines, automation, taking over more and more of the routine stuff. So what's left for us humans?
Yeah, what are we supposed to be doing while the robots take over the world?
That's the thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's left is the stuff machines can't do yet. The stuff that requires, deep thinking, creativity, making connections that algorithms haven't quite figured out.
So it's like the people who can master complicated things quickly, who can really produce at a high level, those are the ones who are going to thrive in this new landscape.
Exactly. And here's the real kicker. Newport argues that deep work isn't just some innate talent, It's a skill. You have to train for it, just like you'd train for a marathon or, I don't know, learn a musical instrument.
So it's like going to the mental gym, putting in the reps to build those focus muscles.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't expect to walk into a gym and bench press like a car on your first try, right? Deep work takes practice, but the payoff, it can be huge.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But here's my question. How are we even supposed to get started when it feels like everything around us is designed to make us lose focus? Open offices, endless emails, this always-on mentality. It's exhausting.
You just nailed it. That's a huge part of the problem. And Newport actually has a name for it, the metric black hole. It's this idea that in a lot of jobs, it's tough to actually measure real valuable output.
So what happens? We end up just looking busy to make up for it.
Exactly. We start focusing on being seen as productive, even if it means sacrificing the work that actually moves the needle, answering emails the second they come in, being active on every Slack channel.
It's like we're all stuck in this performance of busyness, even if it doesn't actually achieve anything.
It's kind of scary how true that is, isn't it? And this all feeds into this bigger issue of what he calls technopoly.
Technopoly. Okay, I like where this is going.
It's this, unquestioning belief that more technology automatically equals a better way of life, But often it just makes it harder to focus on what truly matters. We end up chasing the latest app, embracing open offices, all in the name of progress.
Right. Like it's all going to magically make us more productive, even though it often feels like the opposite.
Exactly. We're so busy being connected, we forget how to connect with, the work that actually matters.
So if our offices are these black holes of distraction and our brains are basically wired to crave that busyness, what's the impact? I mean, besides feeling a little frazzled at the end of the day, is there actually something deeper going on?
Well, think about it this way. Every time you get distracted, your brain has to switch gears, refocus, do that enough times a day, and you're basically running a marathon on a treadmill, exhausting yourself without actually getting anywhere.
Wow, yeah, I feel that.
Right. And it's not just about feeling tired. This constant switching actually rewires our brains over time, making it even harder to focus.
We're basically training our brains to be more distracted. That's not good.
No, it's not. And unfortunately, it can create this negativity bias too. Our brains start latching on to the negative, the stressful stuff, more easily.
That makes me think about Winifred Gallagher's story, the science writer who intentionally focused on the positive while dealing with cancer.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That story is incredible. Here she is going through something so difficult, and she makes a conscious effort to shift her attention to the good things in her life.
It's like she intuitively knew that where you focus your attention, it matters.
And the amazing thing is that neuroscience backs her up. It really shows how what we focus on actually shapes our brain. If we're constantly bombarded by negativity and distraction, our brains start to crave more of that. But we focus on the positive, on meaningful work.
We can rewire our brains for a better, happier, more focused existence.
That's the idea. Our brains are incredibly adaptable, and deep work can be a powerful tool in that process.
That's pretty amazing, but it makes you wonder how many of us are stuck in that negativity loop without even realizing it just because of how approaching our work, how we're letting technology kind of run the show.
That's a great question. And it highlights this crucial distinction between just getting things done, checking them off the list, and actually tapping into that state of flow. If you're
Oh, yeah. Flow state. It's like that feeling of being totally absorbed in what you're doing where you lose track of time, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Deep work isn't just about powering through tasks. It's about accessing that state of focus where you're so engaged that you actually derive satisfaction, even joy, from the work itself.
That sounds amazing, but also kind of impossible in the real world, If we're constantly surrounded by distractions at work, at home, everywhere, how do we actually create the space for that kind of focus? It's not like we can all just build ourselves a productivity palace or something. You're right. Building a productivity palace isn't exactly practical for most of us. But Newport does talk about this really fascinating concept. In the book, he calls it the eudaimonia machine.
Oh, yeah, the eudaimonia machine. It's this wild idea for a building that's basically designed from the ground up for deep work. Imagine a workspace with a gallery for inspiration, a salon for brainstorming, a library for quiet reflection.
It's like a monastery for the modern knowledge worker.
Exactly. And then, to top it all off, they have these completely silent, tech-free chambers where you can go when you really need to focus without distractions.
Okay, that's both amazing and slightly intimidating. But I guess the point isn't necessarily that we all need to go build our own soundproof writing caves, right?
Right. It's more about the philosophy behind it. The eudaimonia machine is this really extreme example of how we can be more intentional about designing our environment to support deep work.
So even if we're stuck with our current workspace, there are still things we can do, right? Like maybe finally decluttering my desk or finding that quiet corner in the library or coffee shop.
Exactly. It's about taking control, even in small ways. And the good news is, Newport doesn't prescribe a one-size-fits-all approach to deep work. He actually lays out these different philosophies, ways of structuring your time and attention to make it work for you.
See, this is what I love. There's not just one right way to do it. So walk us through those philosophies a bit. What are the key differences?
Okay, so he talks about the monastic philosophy, which is probably what it sounds like.
Totally off the grid, no distractions whatsoever.
Pretty much. He gives the example of Donald Knuth, this famous computer scientist, who basically made himself completely unavailable for years while working on a huge project. No email, no phone calls, nothing.
Okay, that's next level. What about something a little more realistic for us regular folks?
Right, that's where the bimodal philosophy comes in. It's about carving out these dedicated chunks of time for deep work, but then you also have periods where you're doing more typical work, interacting with colleagues, checking emails, that kind of thing.
So it's like having the best of both worlds, focus and connection.
Yeah, exactly. He uses the example of Carl Jung, the psychologist, who would retreat to his writing tower for these stretches of intense focus. But then he'd also be out in the world seeing patients, giving lectures.
That makes a lot of sense. You're still engaging with the world, but you're also carving out those protected periods for deep work. What are some of the other philosophies?
Well, there's the rhythmic philosophy, which is all about making deep work a regular habit.
So blocking out the same time every day for focused work.
Exactly. It's about building that consistency so it becomes almost automatic. And then finally, there's the journalistic philosophy.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How do journalists fit deep work into their crazy deadline-driven schedules?
Well, it's less about having these huge blocks of uninterrupted time and more about learning to switch into deep work mode whenever the opportunity arises.
So squeezing in a few hours of focused writing between interviews and deadlines.
Exactly. He uses the example of Walter Isaacson, who's written these massive biographies of Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, he's insanely prolific.
And he does it all while having this incredibly demanding schedule. So the journalistic philosophy is really about being flexible and opportunistic with your deep work time.
Okay, I'm loving this idea that there are different approaches because it makes deep work seem so much more attainable. But I do have one maybe slightly embarrassing question.
Go for it.
Even if I clear my schedule and banish all distractions, how do I actually train my brain to focus? What if I sit down for a deep work session and my mind just wants to wander?
That's a great question, and it's something a lot of us struggle with. You're not alone. One technique Newport talks about is called productive meditation.
productive meditation. So it's not just about clearing your mind. There's like an actual goal involved.
Right. It's about using downtime like your commute, taking a walk, even waiting for a meeting to start to actively think through a work problem without distractions.
Oh, interesting. So instead of just scrolling through my phone or whatever, I could use that time to like mentally work through a presentation or something.
Exactly. Newport actually uses his walks to and from work to think through complex ideas for his books and articles.
So it's like turning those little pockets of time into these mini meditation retreats for your mind where you're actually getting stuff done.
That's a great way to put it. And what's cool about productive meditation is that it has these double benefits. First, it strengthens your ability to resist distractions because you're training your mind to stay on track.
It's like building those mental focus muscles.
Exactly. And second, it sharpens your concentration skills.
Yeah.
Because you're pushing yourself to think deeply about a problem without relying on, external aids like the internet or your notes.
Okay, I'm definitely going to try that. But I'm not going to lie, my brain loves to go down rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Like, how do I avoid just getting lost in thought loops instead of actually having a productive meditation?
That's a great point. It's easy to get, mentally stuck in a loop. So how do we actually make sure that these productive meditation sessions are, actually productive?
Well, Newport actually talks about that too. He calls it the looping problem. It's that thing where you end up just going over the same ideas again and again without really getting anywhere.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling. Like you're thinking, but not really making any real progress. Exactly. So he stresses how important it is to go into these thinking sessions with some kind of structure.
So instead of just letting my mind wander aimlessly, I need a game plan.
Yeah, that's the idea. He suggests, identifying the key parts of the problem you're trying to solve and then coming up with a specific question that pushes you to the next step.
So instead of how do I fix this giant problem, it's more like what's the most important thing I need to figure out right now?
Exactly. Or, if you're writing something, it could be what's the most engaging way to start this paragraph? Having that clear focus keeps your mind from going off on tangents.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Much better than just hoping for a breakthrough while I'm waiting for the coffee to brew.
Totally. It's all about being intentional with your mental energy, just like you would be with a physical workout.
Okay, so we're training our brains internally, but what about all the external distractions? The pings, the dings, the constant feeling like we need to be connected. How do we manage all of that?
Ah, the million-dollar question, right? Taming the technology beast. Well, Newport's pretty adamant that willpower alone isn't enough. We need to be smarter than that. He's a big advocate for what he calls the craftsman approach to technology.
Craftsman approach. I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
So it's all about being really, really picky about the tools we allow into our lives. Like a craftsman carefully selecting the best tools for their workshop, we need to be just as discerning with our digital tools.
So instead of just downloading every new app or gadget because it's trendy or whatever, we need to ask ourselves if it's actually going to help us do our best work.
Exactly. He uses this great analogy of a farmer trying to decide if they should buy a fancy new hay baler.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Go on.
So the hay baler, it seems useful on the surface, right? Like you can produce your own hay, maybe save some money. But what if the cost of buying and maintaining that thing actually throws off the entire farm's ecosystem? Sometimes, he argues, it's better to stick with the simpler tools, the ones you can rely on, and that truly align with your overall goals.
Yeah, it's such a good analogy. It's not about just blindly adopting every new thing. It's about being mindful about what we let into our lives and how it affects our work.
Yes. It's about recognizing that our time and attention are these precious resources, and we get to choose how we use them. You don't have to be at the mercy of every notification or new app that comes along.
Speaking of precious resources, there's this idea you touched on earlier, the law of the vital few. Remind us what that is again and how it relates to all of this.
Right. So the law of the vital few, also known as the 80-20 rule, is this principle that suggests that roughly 80% of our results come from just 20% of our efforts.
So, the majority of our successes come from a relatively small portion of what we actually do.
Yeah, pretty much. And that means that a lot of us are probably wasting a ton of time and energy on stuff that's not really moving the needle.
Like spending hours scrolling through social media instead of working on that project that's really going to make a difference.
You got it. And one of the more, shall we say, provocative things Newport suggests to combat this is something he calls a 30-day social media packing party.
A packing party? I'm going on vacation from the internet.
It's more like, you know when you're moving and you pack up all your belongings and then you realize how much stuff you have that you don't actually need or use?
Oh, yeah, tell me about it. I swear, half my wardrobe never sees the light of day.
Right. So Newport argues that a lot of us have this fear of missing out, this feeling that we need to be plugged into social media all the time. But when we actually take a step back, we often realize it's not as essential as we thought.
That's a bold move, but I can see how it would be really eye-opening. Okay, so let's say we've identified our vital few tasks. We're getting a handle on distractions. We're being more intentional about our technology use. What are some practical ways we can actually structure our days to make deep work happen?
Well, for starters, Newport's a big fan of scheduling, like scheduling every minute of your day.
Wait, really? Every single minute? That sounds a little intense.
It sounds more extreme than it is. It's not so much about being, like, completely rigid with your time, but more about being intentional, making sure that you've got those dedicated blocks in your day for deep work and that you're not just letting meetings and emails run the show.
So it's like that saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your calendar instead of letting your calendar control you.
I love that. Okay, what else?
Well, this ties into the scheduling piece, but he also talks about the importance of becoming hard to reach.
Okay, I'm listening, but I do like being able to check my email.
Oh, it's not about going completely off the grid or anything. It's more about setting boundaries. Like, maybe you don't need to be checking email every 5 seconds. Maybe you can batch it a couple of times a day or, set specific times when you're available for calls and meetings.
Oh, that's a good idea. I always feel like I'm chasing that inbox zero dream, but it never actually happens.
It's a myth. Most of us will never achieve inbox zero, and that's okay. The point is to have a system for filtering those messages, for responding only to what truly requires your attention.
So we're planning our days, being mindful about communication. What other counterintuitive advice does Newport have up his sleeve?
Well, one that I found really interesting is this idea of fixed schedule productivity.
Fixed schedule productivity. That sounds kind of like what we were just talking about, right?
It's similar, but it takes things a step further. It basically flips the traditional workaholic mentality on its head.
Okay, intrigue me. How so?
So instead of glorifying long hours and the hustle harder mentality, fixed schedule productivity is all about setting a firm end time for your workday. Like deciding that no matter what, you're done at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. And then here's the key. You work backward from that fixed endpoint, figuring out how to be as productive as possible within those constraints.
So instead of letting work bleed into every waking hour, you're drawing a line in the sand and forcing yourself to be more efficient with the time you have.
Yes. And it sounds counterintuitive, but it can actually make you more productive because it forces you to ruthlessly prioritize, to eliminate the non-essential tasks, and to really focus on what matters.
It's like that Parkinson's law thing, right? Work expands to fill the time we give it.
Exactly. So if we give ourselves unlimited time, we'll find ways to fill it, even if it's with busy work. But if we set limits, we're forced to be more discerning, to make sure we're spending our time on the things that are truly valuable.
Okay, I am convinced. But all this talk about deep work focus, productivity hacks, it makes me wonder, did Cal Newport, just spring from the womb with laser-like focus? Or did he have to work at it like the rest of us?
Well, I'm happy to report that he's human, just like us. He actually talks about his own journey in the book, and it's surprisingly relatable. He wasn't always this deep work guru.
Really? Even he struggled.
Oh, yeah. He had to train himself over time, just like we're talking about. Experimenting with different strategies, building those mental muscles.
So it's not like you just read the book and then, boom, you're a deep work master. It's a process.
Exactly. He actually tells this funny story about when he was in grad school and how he was supposed to be working on his dissertation.
Oh, no. What happened?
Well, he had this realization that he was spending hours and hours just, surfing the web instead of actually working on his research.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better about my own procrastination habits. If Cal Newport can fall into that trap, there's hope for me yet.
Exactly. The point is that he recognized those habits weren't serving him, so he started making changes. He started setting constraints like no working at night, taking long lunch breaks to exercise. He was basically training for a more focused work life.
He was building those deep work muscles we keep talking about.
Exactly. And it worked. He talks about how dramatically his academic output increased after he implemented these strategies. And get this, he even wrote a significant portion of deep work, while sticking to these constraints.
So it's not just theoretical for him, it's a lived experience. He walks the walk.
Exactly. And I think that's so important because it means that these strategies aren't just for people who have like tons of free time or who are naturally inclined to focus. They work even for people with really demanding schedules and real-life distractions.
Yeah, it's really encouraging. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into deep work, what's the one big takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
If I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be this. In a world that's absolutely drowning in distractions, the ability to truly focus is like a superpower. And it's not just about like getting more things done. It's about living a more fulfilling, more meaningful life.
And the great news is that it is a skill we can develop, right?
Absolutely. It takes effort, it takes intentionality, it takes a little bit of planning and practice, but it's absolutely possible. We can design our life, design our work habits to support deep work. We can literally train our brains to resist distractions and to focus more deeply, just like we train our bodies at the gym. We have the power to reclaim our time and our attention, and in doing so, unlock our full potential.
I love that. So for everyone listening who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed, but also hopefully inspired, what's one change you can make this week to create more space for deep work in your life?
Yes. What's one small step you can take today to start building those deep work muscles? Could you schedule a block of distraction-free time in your calendar? Could you experiment with productive meditation on your commute? Could you try a mini digital detox, even just for an evening?
Every journey, no matter how ambitious, starts with that first step. What will yours be? We'd love to hear about your own deep work experiences, your challenges, your successes, your strategies. Let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, happy diving.